Now, Fawes Gerges, professor of Middle Eastern politics and international relations at the London School of Economics. Marc Ginsberg, former U.S. ambassador to Morocco, and Mona Eltahawy, Egyptian-born journalist and recently made friend of the DR show. Mona, where do the protesters go from here?
The protesters are absolutely determined, Dylan, to stay exactly where they are until Mubarak steps down. They have already dubbed next week the Resistance Week. And I think it's very simple what the international community needs to do to take their side, because the longer Mubarak stays, the more he continues to arrest human rights activists and bloggers. The U.S. needs to cut its military aid to Egypt, $1.3 billion. The international community needs to freeze the Mubarak family fortune and assets. And U.S. lobbyists who get $2 million a year from the Egyptian regime must be named and shamed because they continue to prop up the Mubarak regime in Washington. We must take action on all those 3 points.
Any chance of that, Ambassador Ginsberg?
Well, those are all very worthy goals if you really want to take the side of the protesters, but they're not practical. First of all, it makes no difference who you name here. The lobbyists are already well known among us here in Washington, number one. Number two, yes, if Senator Leahy and the Congress want to end fiscal year 2011 assistance to Egypt, it would take another 2 years for that to take any real practical impact, given the fact that most of this is foreign military sales that are in the pipeline. Number three, the real issue here, Dylan, is important for everyone to understand. There are laws that, whether you like them or not, have to be in effect implemented in order for there to be a lifting of the emergency decree. The vice president really has no executive power. If Mubarak steps away, it's the speaker of the parliament. Now, no one wants the speaker of the parliament to take over as president. If indeed the plan here is to have a transitional government, you need to have political parties be able to compete as part of a transitional government, and they're all outlawed, or many of them are. So there's laws that have to be passed here to get this process underway. So there's a certain, look, if you want to play lawyer here, which I'm prepared to do because I used to be a lawyer for Egypt, I know these laws, you've got to understand that we have to go through these steps in order for Egyptian law to clear the way for this transitional government.
Fawes, put me in the shoes of Hosni Mubarak in his living room watching the live feed today.
Today was a good day for me, Hosni Mubarak. I survived one of the most pivotal days in the revolt against me. Now I have the time to mobilize the ruling National Party. Now the military has more time to assert control. Now the army, and in particular the senior echelons of my army, have the time to basically also manage the transition. Even though the momentum has shifted against me, even though many elements within the military realize that I am a great liability for the army and for the country, but I have survived more than 10 days, and every day is a plus day for me.
Mona, is there a point where the protesters start to run into the risk of alienating those who are not protesting simply because of the duration of the disruption in what is typically a vibrant, artistic, creative economy in Cairo, in Alexandria?
That's exactly what Mubarak wants, Dylan, because he wants to pull this out as long as possible. Don't forget that while we're all focusing on how joyous the atmosphere is in Tahrir Square and other parts of Egypt, his regime continues to brutally crack down. There are bloggers, as we speak, who are being arrested by military police. So the armed forces are not being that great. There are human rights activists and lawyers. I mean, who arrests human rights activists and lawyers? And Mubarak has shut down banks, the train lines. He has helped to basically ruin the Egyptian economy by people running up with tourists and investors fleeing from Egypt. So Mubarak is trying to turn Egyptians against each other. He is creating the very chaos that he claims he wants to save Egypt from.
So how can the protesters add leverage without destroying the immense credibility I think they accumulated today with the incredible, not just a congregation, but incredibly positive tone and peaceful nature of the congregation? How do they take what they have going for them and use it for their agenda without falling into the divisiveness that seems quite possible inside that country?
Well, by telling
ultimately,
everybody that they're on the right side.
Mona first.
Okay.
by explaining to the international community that the longer that Mubarak stays, the more obvious his regime is illegitimate. Marc Ginsberg speaks about law and what's happening in the Egyptian legal system. That is all irrelevant right now. What is happening is an illegitimate regime that has been in power for 30 years continues to strangle the country in the name of stability when it's actually bringing about the very opposite. And don't forget that Omar Suleiman, his vice president, is in charge of torture and was torturing for the U.S. administration as part of rendition.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a torturer and a dictator.
Mark, same question.
Well, I think the most important thing here is putting aside the emotions of the moment. It's important for the youth, the April 6th youth movement, which is behind this, which really is the core strength of the demonstrators. They need to be better organized. They need to have the type of coherency of leadership that is missing in the street. This is a wonderfully important democratic revolution, but the most important thing is that they need to nominate leaders who speak for them instead of this being hijacked by representatives of the government and representatives of other political parties who don't necessarily share the same interests as the demonstrators do in the long run. That's the most important key. The most important key is for them to coalesce and use this energy quickly to get some leadership among their group.
Fawaz, same thing. Instead of channeling Mubarak, channel a leader of the opposition, knowing the asset that you have, tremendous numbers of people, a tremendous amount of international respect and support for the nature of their behavior and presentation, for their festive, almost party-like expression, as opposed to the sort of violence that I think a lot of folks might fear with that many people in one place. How do you work with what's working for you if you are one of them?
You see, the power of the protesters lies in the fact that more and more people are coming out. That is, you have now an active majority that basically are against Hosni Mubarak. But the reality is this particular active majority is not organized. It lacks what I call a consolidated leadership. It lacks a consolidated blueprint. Let's keep in mind that the opposition is a rainbow coalition of oppositional forces. You don't have a consolidated leadership. Even though Mohammed al-Baradei, the Nobel Prize winner, has emerged as the public face of the opposition remains quite very splintered, very fragmented. I mean, look what we're talking about. We're talking about Mohammed al-Baradei. We're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. We're talking about the April 6th movement. We're talking about the nationalists, the leftists. And this is a problem for the opposition because so far I don't think a united leadership has emerged out of this particular turmoil. I would like the opposition to give more thought for the morning after. That is, to really begin the process of reflecting on what kind of transitional government it wants, what kind of an institutional process it wants. I would like the opposition leaders to sit down and really brainstorm about the future of Egypt instead of just basically talking individually to Vice President Omar Suleiman. The reality on the ground...
No, go ahead.
The reality is the army holds the key to the future transition in Egypt. What the army is trying to do is to basically splinter the opposition, to deal with the opposition as individual constituencies. I mean, look what Omar Suleiman said yesterday. We have invited the Muslim Brotherhood to take part in the talks. We have invited the various individuals of the opposition. This is the wrong way to go for the opposition. I don't see a leadership emerging, right, a united, unified leadership emerging out of this particular rainbow coalition.
Yeah, it sounds very much like the very asset that has helped them the most in the internet to organize the distribution of information to get
Absolutely.
there is what will save them if they can save themselves with some sort of web-based coalition document that then is being circulated among all of them using, obviously, Facebook, Twitter, and the rest of it. We'll see if such a document emerges.
We have not seen any blueprint. We have not seen any program. We have not seen any agenda. I mean, how about a salvation program for Egypt? How about a meeting for the Egyptian? We don't see it. And this lack of vision is really quite a major shortcoming on the part of the opposition.
All right. Listen, a wonderful conversation with the three of you. Thank you so much. Fawes Gerges, Marc Ginsberg, and Mona Eltahawy. Thank you, guys.